And it's interesting to me that, people, when they saw the Return of the King movie, how Peter Jackson adapted the book, a lot of people were a bit annoyed that he cut out the scouring of the Shire. But nobody, as far as I was aware, ever complained, even briefly, that he'd cut the field of Cormallen. And yet, by Tolkien's own reckoning, it is the peak story. It's the peak Middle-earth moment. It's the climax of the story. And he has deliberately sort of structured the location to signify that by...
Joining me today is Professor Michael Ward. I am honored and privileged for this conversation to happen, and I know that you're going to enjoy it. Professor Ward, how are you today?
I'm well, Derek. Thank you very much. Speaking to you from Oxford, England.
We are, believe it is 8 hours apart by the time zones here, and it's dinner time for you and just finished breakfast for me. So I'm guessing our second breakfast. I'm wondering, before we get into Mr. Tolkien's stories, if you'd be willing to just share a bit about your own life story and how you got to where you're at today.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I'm English, as you can probably tell from my accent. I was born and raised in the south of England, into a Christian family. My parents read me Narnia, and I got from Narnia quite quickly into Tolkien. I came here to Oxford to do my undergrad in English and studied C.S. Lewis for that degree, formally for the first time, and then did my PhD on C.S. Lewis as well. And I now have a career specialising in the teaching of theological imagination in the works of C.S. Lewis principally, but also Tolkien a bit, and even Chesterton and others. So yeah, I work here in the theology faculty at the University of Oxford, but I also do a lot of teaching and speaking in America. I've got a visiting professor role at Hillsdale College, Michigan, and I teach online for the MA program in Christian Apologetics at Houston Christian University. So I'm back and forth across the Atlantic quite a bit.
Fabulous. Well, we had a Hillsdale professor on earlier in this series, Professor Bradley Berzer. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but yeah, great chap. Oh, thank you for sharing that. You mentioned that you started with Narnia and then quickly moved on to Tolkien. About how old were you, and what was your first impression of reading his work?
Tolkien, I was probably, well, I first read The Hobbit, and I must have been, I don't know, 9, 10, and then perhaps 12, 13 for The Lord of the Rings. I read that entirely under my own steam. My parents didn't read that to me, and I don't think either of my two older brothers had ever read it either. It was very much my own sort of pioneering discovery. But I thought, well, I knew that Lewis and Tolkien had been friends, and so I thought, well, I've enjoyed Narnia, and I've enjoyed The Hobbit, so no doubt I'll be able to enjoy this much bigger book. And it probably was the biggest work of fiction I had ever read up till that stage. But I've now read it, 6 or 7 or 8 times, and I enjoy it all the more every time I go back.
Yeah, it is like revisiting an old friend and discovering a new facet of their character and nature that makes you fall in love all the more, I suppose.
Yeah.
For this episode, we're going to be discussing a few different elements, so not necessarily a single character, but in particular, I'm really honored and pleased that I get to be one of the first to interview you on an essay you wrote entitled Peak Middle-earth: Why Mount Doom is Not the Climax of The Lord of the Rings. And I would love for you to provide a bit of a preface overview of what it is that this essay is attempting to draw out and point us to as fans and readers of Tolkien.
Yeah, thank you. What is the climax of The Lord of the Rings? That is a good sort of question to ask, to set up the essay that I wrote. When I ask people that question, what's the climax of The Lord of the Rings? nearly always they say the destruction of the ring, the events on Mount Doom. And if they don't say that, they say something like, Frodo's departure for the Grey Havens. That's where the story ends, they think, when Frodo goes off. Or they say when Sam comes back and says, well, I'm back, and, and he's home again. Or they might say, if they don't say any of those things, they might say the coronation of Aragorn. But the one thing they never say is the one thing that Tolkien himself said was the climax, the peak of the story's music, after which he said everything is the coda. It's the tail of the story, after this peak scene. And the peak scene is in that chapter entitled The Field of Cormallen. It's after the destruction of the ring. Frodo and Sam have been whisked away by the eagles to this place in Ithilien. And interestingly, Tolkien has never taken us to the Field of Cormallen before. It's a totally new place. And it's there that the two hobbits are, after they've recovered from their ordeal and they're dressed in fine clothes, they are then taken out and applauded and praised and celebrated for their heroism. And it's a glorious scene, very moving. All my wishes have come true, says Sam, and then he laughs and he cries, and everybody laughs and cries with him. And their thoughts were like swords, and they passed out into regions where joy and sorrow flow together, and tears are the very wine of blessedness. It's a beautiful scene, a very moving moment, and Tolkien himself said that he wept as he wrote it. And in fact, you can find published now in a book of Tolkien's materials the very page of his handwritten script where he wept and the tears fell on the ink and blotted the words.
Wow.
And he says, I can't help but think this is a supreme moment of its kind. It's a eucatastrophe. It's the glorious and unexpected turn. The hobbits thought they were going to die on Mount Doom, and then suddenly they're being celebrated and praised as the greatest heroes of Middle Earth. What a turnabout. And so that's the peak scene, according to Tolkien. The highest point in the music of the whole romance.
Boy, I have two thoughts. The first being this richness and the depth of that blend of sorrow and joy, that bittersweet sensation that he is describing there and apparently himself felt. Do you have any comments on that, just as human beings, and perhaps the transcendent experiences of the divine in our own hearts and souls and spirits, where there is perpetually that not childish happiness, but a depth to that joy tinged with sorrow?
Absolutely, for both Lewis and Tolkien, I think that was it was a key emotion to try to capture in their writings, because they thought it was so central an aspect of of human life in general, but of the Christian life in particular, because what is the center of the Christian life for Lewis and Tolkien? But I mean, in their own words, they both say it's the celebration of the Eucharist. That was the heart of their Christian lives. And at the Eucharist, what is happening? We are rejoicing that the Lord's body was broken and his blood was shed. Not because, we rejoice in suffering, but we rejoice that he did those things and overcame death. But the suffering is an inescapable aspect of the story. You don't get to the resurrection except by going through Good Friday. And so that combination of the sorrow of Good Friday and the joy of the resurrection is a sort of crush note, like musicians say. It's bitter and it's sweet. It's dark, but it's still got a shadow behind it somewhere. And and therefore that what some I think he was an 8th century writer, John Climacus, called the Carmolippic, the joy sorrow or the sorrowful joy, is
Yeah.
a really crucial aspect of our Christian experience.
Well, and perhaps you could speak then to how, in this account and Cormallen, if there is an aspect of that, as you described, the darkness, but the shadow behind it, when it comes to the golden trees, and you'll forgive me, I'm not the best at pronouncing all the different characters' names, but in particular, maybe how Cormallen fits into the origins of Middle Earth and what it represents. And also, one of the things that, yeah, I'll let you say that and then I'll continue.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. I mean, the thing that puzzled me about this scene, this climactic scene, is that it took place in a previously unvisited location. Because why didn't Tolkien take the hobbits off to Rivendell or Lothlorien or even back to the Shire? Those are places that the reader already knows, and they're places that are sort of suitable. They've got emotional, symbolic resonances ready-made, as it were. So why would Tolkien take us to a completely new location? That doesn't seem to be part of the normal way in which storytellers structure their stories. Plot and place are usually connected. That where things happen and what things happen are usually connected, so that the location intensifies the significance of the action. You think, oh, of course this has to happen here. It would be sort of irrelevant if it happened elsewhere. So, I've got a couple of
Yeah.
examples. If you think of Shakespeare and King Lear, King Lear rails against the storm. Now, he could theoretically have raged against the storm from inside a warm house. Blow winds and crack your cheeks. But of course, it's much more suitable if he does it on the blasted heath, while all the cataracts and the hurricanes are blowing around him. Or think also of Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. When Elizabeth Bennet finally really discovers that she's in love with Mr. Darcy, where does it happen? I mean, it could happen anywhere. She's met him several times before this moment in lots of different locations, but of course it has to happen at his own home in the north of England, in Pemberley, where he's relaxed and where everybody knows him and he's most himself, and that's when Elizabeth sees him for who he truly is. So plot and place are mutually implicated, and the one strengthens the other. So why would Tolkien take us to a place which has no pre-existing meaning for the reader? And that's what got me interested in the name Cormallen, this field where the celebrations of victory take place. Cormallen. Now, Tolkien said that his work was fundamentally linguistic in origin. For him, a name comes first, and then the story follows. So what does the name Cormallen mean? Unfortunately, there's no doubt about that, because there's a convenient appendix to the Silmarillion, which tells us that Cormallen is formed of two key words in Tolkien's invented languages. So there's mal, which means gold, and there's cor, which means ring or circle. A golden
So
circle.
yeah.
A golden ring. How interesting. That can't be an accident. And it's not just, it's not an allusion to the Ring of Power. It's a reference to the fact that on the field of Cormallen, golden trees grew there in a circle. It's a place of beauty. It's a place of colour and life. And as we know, trees for Tolkien were hugely important. I think on this series, you've already had someone talking about Treebeard as their favourite character. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
And, Treebeard is only the most obvious of all the trees in Tolkien's imagination. But you think of the party tree, Old Man Willow, the White Tree of Gondor, Lothlorien, the golden wood. Trees are everywhere in Tolkien's imagination. He loved them because they were beautiful, because they were old, and because they were, among other things, they suggested the cross of Christ, because of course the cross in the scriptures is often referred to as a tree. Cursed be everyone who hangs on a tree, we read in the Bible. And also, Tolkien, of course, was a philologist, and he knew that the word tree is connected to the word trust and truth. In lots of languages, apparently, there's a sort of semantic overlap between trees and truth and trust. Because trees are, they're seemingly permanent, they're long-lived, they're sturdy, they've been there for generations, for centuries.
Yeah.
And so you can see how
they don't move and abandon you in times of storm.
exactly, except very occasionally.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
generally speaking, you think of an oak, you think of a cedar tree, and you think, yeah, that's beautiful, and I can take cover under that, and I can climb it, and it won't give way underneath me, and so on and so forth. So trees and trust and truthfulness, and think of the wedding vow, I plight thee my troth, my promise. It's all connected to trees. So Ithilien, this region of Middle-earth, where the field of Cormallen is located, is a fair country of climbing woods, we're told. Frodo and Sam go there in the Two Towers, and it's a beautiful scene. It's where that chapter takes place, entitled "Of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit," and there's a very rich description of all the trees and the flora and the herbs and everything, well beyond the garden lore of Sam, we're told, and that comes well before the destruction of the ring. So Tolkien is as it were setting us up. He is preparing the reader for the climactic scene. It's just he hasn't told us that it's actually Cormallen. It's a part of Ithilien, but the name is not given away until we actually get there. And then when we do get there, after the destruction of the ring, if we remember back to the herbs and the stewed rabbit, we think, oh yeah, this is a lovely place. It's beautiful. It's aromatic. It's full of trees with fluttering leaves, and that's where the hobbits speak long into the night with their friends after the glad day ends. So it is a beautiful scene, but it's depicted relatively briefly, and that's why I think lots of people don't identify as the climactic scene, because it's not written up in a way like Rivendell is or Lothlorien. You can overlook it. And it's interesting to me that people, when they saw the Return of the King movie, how Peter Jackson adapted the book, a lot of people were a bit annoyed that he cut out the scouring of the Shire. But nobody, as far as I was aware, ever complained, even briefly, that he'd cut the field of Cormallen. And yet, by Tolkien's own reckoning, it is the peak story. It's the peak Middle-earth moment. It's the climax of the story, and he has deliberately sort of structured the location to signify that by making it a place where there is a ring of golden trees. So Frodo and Sam have just destroyed the Ring of Power, this metal ring, which is a tool of coercive power. It's evil. It needs to be destroyed. They get rid of that bad ring, and in return they're given this good ring, this beautiful, organic, natural ring. And remember, Tolkien was not a dualist. He didn't believe that good and evil were equal and opposite. He had a good, Christian and Augustinian understanding of evil as parasitic upon the good.
Yes.
Evil things are just distortions or deprivations of something more fundamental, the original goodness. God has no opposite.
Yes.
Some people think that The
Sorry.
opposite of God is Satan, but God has no opposite. The opposite of Satan is not God, but St. Michael. St. Michael is the leader of the unfallen angels, and Satan is the leader of the fallen angels. So when you think about the ring of power, this gold and circular object, well, okay, it's bad, but what is it a parody of? What's the good thing behind it? What is it distorting and corrupting? Well, the implication would seem to be this ring of golden trees, the field of Cormallen, where the beautiful climax of the entire story takes place. That's the only such ring of trees, and laburnums in particular, we'll come on to that, anywhere in Middle-earth.
Thank you so much. Would you take a second to describe the depiction of gold specifically, and the presence of evil in both the ring, but in sort of that the way that he talks about gold throughout the universe of Middle Earth? Does that make sense?
Well, let me quote you something. This is from the History of Middle-earth, where Tolkien says, Sauron's power was not in gold as such, but in a particular form or shape made of a particular portion of total gold. So Sauron's power is sort of concentrated in the ring. Whereas the other main evil character in Middle-earth, who's called Morgoth, his power was disseminated, we're told, throughout gold. It was nowhere absolute, because Morgoth didn't create gold, but it was nowhere absent. So all gold in Middle-earth seems to have had, so Tolkien says, a specially evil trend. But only a trend. You know, gold is not essentially or fundamentally evil, but it's prone to corruption.
Right. And to corrupt the hearts of men.
Yes.
Yes. Interesting.
But anyway, so that's something about gold. We've talked about his love for trees. Now he brings the goldenness and the trees together in the field of Cormallen, but specifically with reference to it's getting very nerdy, but I hope it's interesting, because after all, this is the scene that Tolkien wept as he wrote. Right. There ought to be something significant about it, and the significance is that these are not just any old golden trees, they are laburnums. Now that's significant because the original two trees of Valinor, you know, the golden tree and the silver tree, which are kind of prehistoric mythological representations of the sun and the moon. We're told of the sun tree, which goes by the name Laurelin, let me just get the quotation so I don't mangle it. Right, so the sun tree is called Laurelin, which means in Tolkien's invented language, the song of gold. And we're told that this Laurelin tree gives out a fiery fruit, which is eventually formed into the sun. And we're told flowers, this is from the Silmarillion, flowers swung upon the branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground, and from the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. And then Tolkien goes on to say that the spilth of Laurelin, unusual word, spilth, means that which is spilled. The spilth of Laurelin is collected and kept in great vats like shining lakes, that were to all the land of the Valar as wells of water and of light. And in a note on the typescript, Tolkien reveals that this spilth, he uses, that word spilth is not Tolkien's own invention. You can find it in the Oxford English Dictionary. But he uses it because he found it many years earlier in the poetry of Francis Thompson. Francis Thompson is now mostly forgotten, except for his poem, The Hound of Heaven. You know The Hound of Heaven?
Yes, I have heard of that one. I was going to say I could not recall his name, but I just demonstrated your point.
Yeah, nobody knows Francis Thompson anymore except for The Hound of Heaven. where God is depicted like a hound hunting the human soul untiringly. Anyway, so Francis Thompson, in addition to writing The Hound of Heaven, wrote a poem in which he talks about laburnums and their jocund spilth of yellow flame or yellow fire. So that's where Tolkien, who loved Francis Thompson, first came across the word spilth. He associates it with the golden blossoms of laburnums. And then when Tolkien, comes to invent his own sun tree, he says that laurelin is founded upon the laburnum that he finds in Francis Thompson. Okay, so the sun tree, the source of all light in Middle-earth, is this sort of mythologized laburnum tree. And it's in a circle of laburnums that Frodo and Sam are praised after they've destroyed the ring. Which, that's no accident, of course. What we're meant to surmise is that, Frodo and Sam, in destroying the ring, have helped preserve goodness and light in the world. They've gone with the light of the world. The light of the world is a biblical phrase that Jesus applies to himself in John's Gospel. I am the light of the world. And so Tolkien, using the sun imagery and the tree imagery and the laburnums and the golden light imagery, it's all beautifully coming together in this climactic scene.
And having dispatched with the golden ring of power, they are now standing in the true and original and enduring golden ring. I assume that's. I'm not digging too deep to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's. It's entirely appropriate that this climactic scene happens in this particular place. It's not an accident. But the interesting thing is that Tolkien doesn't make it obvious. I had to do a lot of digging to find out these connections. You can't actually discover it by reference to the Lord of the Rings on its own. You have to go to the Silmarillion and the appendix. Now, this is very interesting to me because it shows that Tolkien wanted to make this very secret, you might even say. Certainly unobvious. You've got to want to find out these connections. And that strikes me as itself very interesting, because a lot of authors, especially when they come to the climactic scene, they sort of overdo it. They hammer the reader so that the reader can't possibly miss, this is the really important moment. But Tolkien does completely the opposite. He understates it. He makes it so subtle that everybody misses it. But
until you came along 50 years later.
Well, yeah, amazingly, nobody seems to have dug into this before me. But the point is that why would Tolkien make it so secretive? And I think it's because, he again is sort of living into his Christian faith, where Jesus, does a lot of his teaching, most of his teaching through parables. And he says that he speaks in parables that everybody will hear him but not understand him. They will see, but they won't perceive. But he who has ears to hear, let him hear. But Jesus doesn't ram his message down the throats of his listeners. He's respecting the freedom of his disciples and, of us too, because Jesus wants God wants a relationship of love and free choice with his family. God could overwhelm us. God could make himself utterly, inescapably obvious, and we would have no choice but to, bow down. But then where would be the freedom? Where would be the choice? That would be a relationship not so much of love as of force, of power. And that's precisely what God will not do. He will not force himself upon us. That's rapacious. That's not loving. So, Tolkien, likewise, in this climactic scene of the entire story, is making it completely missable. on the same principle. You've got to want it.
Right.
You've got to seek it out. For him
Yeah.
who knocks, it will be opened. But
Mm.
unless you knock, it won't be opened. You've got to seek, and then you will find. You've got to ask, and then you will receive. So, it's a profoundly Christian attitude that Tolkien is striking in the way that he constructs his story.
Yes. It's not just the message, but the method itself
Mm.
that becomes this life perspective, this theological, philosophical creation. There's a line in your essay that I highlighted just because it made me smile, and it made me appreciate once again Tolkien's dedication. But you wrote that The Lord of the Rings is a work of artistic intelligence taken to extreme levels of detail, not a product of random irrational processes. There is no such thing in it as sheer coincidence. And that goes to your point, but it also encapsulates this entire enterprise of his life's work. It is a remarkable testament to subcreation in and of itself.
Mm.
And yeah, so I
Yeah.
really thank you for drawing this out. I would love for you to perhaps add whatever other thoughts you have from this
Mm.
essay that we can take away,
Mm.
and perhaps then we can chat a bit about Mr. Fatty Bolger.
Yeah, well, some other things that occur to me about this, indirection, this implicit communication. Remember Gandalf says, I am the servant of the secret fire. The
Mm,
secret fire, the flame imperishable that burns at the heart of the world. Now, as Tolkien once told someone, Clyde Kilby, this secret fire is meant to be his way of depicting the Holy Spirit. Gandalf is a servant of the Holy Spirit. And the Spirit, as we read in John's Gospel, blows wherever it wishes. And you see the effects of the Spirit. You see where the wind is blowing, but you don't know where it's come from or where it's going because it's invisible. It's hugely powerful, totally central to spiritual reality, but not controllable, not visible, not sensible in the ordinary sense of the word. So that's another reason why I think Tolkien, hides his scheme, his imaginative structure so carefully. And also, Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and of course, as a Catholic, he believed that the body, the bread and wine in communion were the body and blood of Jesus. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed, as Jesus says in John chapter 6. It doesn't look like flesh, and it doesn't look like wine. It doesn't taste like flesh, and it doesn't taste like wine. Our senses are deceived.
mm,
But in faith, Tolkien believed, this is Jesus communicating himself in the most intimate and powerful way possible. It really is his presence communicated to us sacramentally. And although, our eyesight and our taste doesn't tell us this, by faith we know. And so there's another example of how at the center of Tolkien's faith you get the idea of hiddenness and cloaking and well, let's call it what it is, holiness. The holy thing is the thing you can't receive without being burnt up. Depart from me, O Lord, for I am a sinful man. Nobody can see the face of God and live. So God, in his mercy and gentleness, accommodates himself to our finiteness and our weakness, and he gives himself fully, but in such a way that we can receive him without being obliterated. So
mm.
again, a very profound central theological and spiritual truth is subtly being worked out in this scene. But one other thing before we move on to Fatty Bolger.
Well, I wanted to actually, since you raised that point, I apologize, but the notion, the doctrine of transubstantiation, for those who are unfamiliar, as you just referenced, is a Catholic doctrine that the elements of the Eucharist, or also known as communion in low church settings, is itself imbued, becomes, it's a mystical encounter, and therefore a person does, as you say, ingest and imbibe the flesh and blood of the Savior. I'm wondering if it doesn't take us too far off track, if you have any thoughts or reflections on where Tolkien may demonstrate that in the narrative of the story.
Hmm.
And if not,
Well,
we can just continue.
well, of course, the lembas bread of the elves, the elven way bread, that you don't need much of to keep going. Um, and Gollum can't abide the smell of it because the suggestion is it's a kind of Eucharistic symbol. I mean, Tolkien is not writing allegory, and he would have hated anyone to say, "Oh, the lembas bread represents the Eucharist." No,
Hmm.
it's much more elusive than that. It just suggests it. It connotes it. There's an echo going on, but not a hard and fast one-to-one parallel. Um, so that's
Yeah.
Tolkien had a profoundly Eucharistic spirituality. He said of the Eucharist that it was the one great thing to love on earth.
Wow.
Um, and he said that, interestingly, he said in his relationship with God, it was not in his experience the hound of heaven. So there again, you have a reference to Francis Thompson. Tolkien said he didn't feel that God was hounding him, pounding after him like a great beast. Not for me the hound of heaven, he said, but the silent and never ceasing appeal of the tabernacle. Now, of course, for a Catholic, that means the place where the consecrated bread is reserved between services. And that's where, that's the centre of the Catholic Church. And that's why believers genuflect. They go down on one knee in front of the tabernacle. Sometimes they cross themselves because, that's the holy focus of the building. And that, for Tolkien, was, where he felt the Lord was constantly calling out to him silently and unceasingly. And, his heart was going out to the Lord. But again, interestingly, the call was silent. He couldn't hear the Lord, but he who has ears, let him hear.
It's surprisingly quite moving for me in this moment. So I appreciate your patience and your grace. I personally have not experienced the kind of description that Tolkien has given it with respect to the, as you said, he called it the most meaningful or richest thing on earth.
The one great
And
thing to love on earth, yes.
the one great thing to love on earth. I will be spending time after this conversation meditating on that thought.
Yeah,
I
well, if
appreciate you.
you had Holly Ordway on recently, didn't you? And she's written
Yes.
this fantastic book called Tolkien's Faith, where she unpacks really everything there is to know about Tolkien and his belief in the Eucharist. So I can't do better than point people in the direction of her book. But let me just say one last thing before we come on to Fatty Bolger, because I think this is quite interesting. So Frodo, the ring bearer, puts on the ring 6 times in the course of the story. He puts it on in Tom Bombadil's house, number 1. He puts it on again at the Prancing Pony, then on Weathertop, just before he's stabbed. He puts it on his finger twice on Armen Hen, when he's escaping from Boromir. And lastly, he puts it on, again, famously, in Mount Doom, just before he's meant to destroy it. He puts it on. Now, again, Tolkien was so precise, so fastidious in all the details of the writing of this story that he can't have failed to count up the number of times Frodo does this, and it is 6 times. Now, 6 in biblical numerology is the bad number. It's the number that falls just short of the perfect 7. So God creates the world in 7 days, and there are the 7 spirits of God, and 7 is everywhere in the Bible. The 7 churches in the book of Revelation. It's the number of completion and fulfillment. So Frodo puts on the ring 6 times, and then his finger is bitten off by Gollum and cast away to be burnt. Like if your hand offendeth you, cut it off.
Yes.
It's better for it to be cut off than for your whole body to be thrown into the fire and burnt. So Frodo undergoes this sort of surgical amputation of the evil finger. And then, as a result of his heroism, because it's only because that he spared Gollum in the first place, that Gollum was there to help Frodo do what he couldn't achieve on his own. And it was so Frodo's mercy and pity that he showed to Gollum earlier on in the story was actually Frodo's moment of supreme heroism, when he could have struck and killed Gollum, but desisted. He showed mercy and magnanimity, as Gandalf had encouraged him to do. So that was Frodo's real moment of heroism. And now at Mount Doom, providentially, the creature he spared enables him to fulfill the quest, even though Frodo is subjectively failing at that moment. And so it's a beautiful manifestation of God's providential care of our fate, that God sees before and after, and what we do that is good in the past is sort of sometimes mysteriously helps us in the future. So anyway, all that is to say that when Frodo goes to the field of Cormallen, and he enters this beautiful ring of golden trees, can we not say that Frodo is now putting on the ring a 7th time? He doesn't have a finger anymore. He couldn't wear the precious if he wanted to, but now his whole being is surrounded by colour and light and fragrance and beauty, and he's not alone. He's not a solitary power addict. He's now surrounded by a whole host of people who are praising him and celebrating him, and he's there with his best friend Sam, and it's a glorious moment. And he's, you could say, this is the true ring. This is finally what he really wanted all along, and now he's got it. Thanks be to God. It's, again, it's, when you think of it in those terms, it's even more beautiful and moving.
That is so stirring. That is exquisite.
Isn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah, it truly is.
It's gorgeous.
It's just marvel at the craftsmanship in. And as you say, the connection between trees and truth. That all along that shadow, that type, that false image that everyone had been pursuing is finally ended, and he stands in the true home. May it be so.
Amen.
Well, I could linger here forever, but I know we have things to do, and I was really curious. So, for those listening or watching, I'm very, very pleased that Holly Ordway, of her own initiative, and I'm so grateful for people like this in my life, emailed an introduction between Michael and I to have this conversation. And Michael referenced a character, Fatty Bolger, and I would love to know why.
Yeah. Well, I'm often asked this question, who's your favourite character in The Lord of the Rings? And, rather than just trot out the obvious answers like Frodo or Sam or Gandalf or Aragorn or even, Treebeard or Eowyn or Faramir. I mean, there are so many to choose. I thought, well, I'm going to choose someone really unobvious. Because remember, one of the things about the hobbits is that they are overlookable. And that's part of, again, Tolkien's spirituality, that he's channeling Mary. Mary in her Magnificat says, the Lord has has raised up the lowly. He's regarded the humility of his handmaid. He's scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts, put down the mighty from their seat, and exalted the humble. And the hobbits are literally humble. Literally lowly. They're short. They're overlookable. And Tolkien says that, the Lord of the Rings was planned to be, I quote, hobbitocentric. That is primarily a study of the ennoblement or sanctification of the humble. He says he saw the value of hobbits in putting earth under the feet of romance and in providing subjects for ennoblement and heroes more praiseworthy than the professionals. And then, interestingly, in the very next sentence, he says, we are all equal before the great author who put down the mighty from their seat and exalted the humble. So he there quotes Mary's song, the Magnificat, from Luke's Gospel. So he's evidently, very easy moving back and forth between Mary's humble example and what he's doing with the hobbits. So the hobbits in general are humble creatures. But, Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin, they become quite famous. They become, everybody knows about them. So who is the humblest of the overlookable hobbits? And that's what led me to Fatty Bolger. Fredegar Bolger. He is one of the friends of Frodo at the start of the story, and he's part of the conspiracy. When Frodo's friends secretly gang up against him so as to prevent him going off on his own, and Merry and Fatty go ahead to prepare for Frodo the house at Crick Hollow when he's needing to leave Hobbiton. And then Fatty, his real name is Fredegar, and Fredegar means, I wrote it down, it's one of Tolkien's invented words. Fredegar comes from Ferdi, meaning peace, and Gar, meaning spear. So the spear of peace. That's Fatty's real name. So there's something warlike. He's not a pushover, Fatty, but he doesn't want to go on the quest with the other hobbits. He'd rather stay home. And that actually turns out to be quite an important role, because Fatty puts on Frodo's clothes so that the Black Riders looking from a distance think, oh, that Frodo is still around. He hasn't left. So Fatty is a kind of decoy. It's quite a dangerous role. And
yes.
And indeed, that the Black Riders come knocking one evening, don't they? And Fatty is terrified and runs off and raises the alarm. But he puts himself in mortal danger. He doesn't want the dangers of the quest, but he's prepared to accept the dangers of staying at home. So in that sense, he's sort of archetypally Hobbit-like. And furthermore, in the Return of the King, after the Shire has been overrun by the ruffians, Fatty takes up arms against them and is captured, and he's put in the lock holes. He's imprisoned. And when at the end of the story, the scouring of the Shire takes place, and the prisoners are released from the lock holes, we're told that he was Fatty no longer. Because he's been starved almost to death in prison, and he's so weak that the other hobbits have to carry him out. So when you think of that, Fatty Bolger is pretty darn heroic, but he's overlookable. He's, of all the overlookable hobbits, he's the most overlooked, and that's why I wanted to say something on his behalf.
Well, you raise a great point to me with the life of Mary and the hobbits, and that the Magnificat, the yielding, the surrender, the obedience. And I wonder if I'm reading this correctly, whether or not there is a commentary to be made on innocence and purity in the sort of the nature and life of the hobbits, and courage and power that is unassuming but is revealed in the testing moments. Is that a fair sort of correlation I'm drawing out?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's entirely right. There's that line, isn't there, in the Lord of the Rings? This is the hour of the Shire folk. This Elrond is
Mm,
saying this. This is the hour of the Shire folk when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. And yeah, just like Mary, this entirely overlookable young woman, unmarried woman, um, what happens to her is, very risky, and Joseph is perplexed and he thinks I better put her away, but decides not to. But Mary becomes the mother of the Saviour, and absolutely crucial in the story of salvation. The whole of Israel's history has come down to this one girl, at her prayers, because she says yes to the angel, be it unto me according to your word, Jesus comes among us. So that's why, Mary is the archetypal disciple. And, hence Tolkien, also, in addition to having a spirituality that was very focused on the Eucharist, also had a spirituality focused on Mary's example. So anyway, when you first said Mary, I thought you were saying Mary, because it's interesting, and I like this little detail that Fatty Bolger and Mary Addock, Brandy Buck, they go off to Crick Hollow to prepare the house. And later we discover that Mary marries Fatty Bolger's sister. So Fatty has a sister called Estella, I think that's her name, and Mary ends up marrying her. So he enter, the Bolgers and the Brandy Bucks form an alliance. So that's a nice little detail. And another nice little detail in the Fellowship of the Ring movie, Peter Jackson's movie, Fatty Bolger does appear very briefly. You can't easily identify him on screen. And although his name is uttered, it's very brief. Bilbo says Fatty Bolger at the party, but you
yes.
can miss it. Anyway, the actor or the person who plays Fatty in the movie is Tom Walsh, who is Fran Walsh's uncle. So, Fran Walsh was one of the screenwriters. And she snuck in her uncle to play this little cameo role. So that's very pleasing too.
Yes. This is just endless layers of charm and endearing virtue in these stories and their portrayals. My goodness, I am so grateful for your time today, and of course all the work that you've done over your career that brings these things to our attention. Is there anything else you'd love to share about anything we've talked about in summation of this great conversation?
Well, yeah, one of the reasons I was put on to Fatty Bolger is, again, my work on C.S. Lewis. He was interested in the unsung heroes, the characters who get overlooked. I think I was really put onto this whole theme when I read Lewis's essay, The World's Last Night. And in that essay, C.S. Lewis says, he's talking about Shakespeare's play King Lear. And he says in King Lear, Act 3, Scene 7, there's a man who is such a minor character that Shakespeare has not even given him a name. He is merely first servant. And all the characters around him, Regan, who's King Lear's daughter, and the Duke of Cornwall and Edmund, they all have fine long-term plans, Lewis says. They think they know how the story is going to end, and they're quite wrong. The servant, this first servant, has no such delusions. He has no notion how the play is going to go, but he understands the present scene. He sees an abomination going on in front of him, the blinding of Gloucester. When Gloucester has his eyes plucked out. Out, vile jelly. It's one of the worst scenes in the whole of Shakespeare. And the servant sees that this is about to happen. And he won't stand it. I'm now quoting Lewis again. His sword is out and pointed at his master's breast in a moment, Then Regan stabs him dead from behind. That is his whole part. 8 lines all told. But if it were real life and not a play, that is the part it would be best to have acted.
Wow.
Isn't that fantastic?
Indeed. It's fabulous, fabulous.
Well, yeah, go on.
It's just so counterintuitive to the nature that possesses us so often for vainglory and for stature and status.
Yeah, the lure of fame. It's a terrible deception. If you want to be great, be small. Don't have a big profile online. Don't be have the physique that turns everybody's heads your way. Which isn't to say anything against fame and health. In principle, they're fine. They're innocent enough. But if you begin to covet them, if you begin to think this is how I will make my life meaningful and valuable and important and memorable, well, think again. There are much more important ways of living your life.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Michael Ward. What an honor it has been for me.
Thank you, Derek. I'm glad to have been with you. Godspeed.
Godspeed.
Today's episode of The Plunge is sponsored by an excerpt from The Fellowship of the Ring, Chapter 5, A Conspiracy Unmasked. This is where the hobbits find themselves at the home of Fredegar, Fatty Bolger, and make the decision. Fatty will be the stand-in for Frodo and will continue to alert others that Frodo is fine. He has not left the Shire, when in fact he has. And thus, Fatty becomes an often, as Michael Ward mentioned, overlooked hero. And now, our excerpt. Frodo sat for a while in thought. "I have made up my mind," he said, finally. "I am starting tomorrow, as soon as it is light. But I am not going by road. It would be safer to wait here than that. If I go through the north gate, my departure from Buckland will be known at once, instead of being secret for several days at least, as it might be. And what is more, the bridge and the east road near the borders will certainly be watched, whether any rider gets into Buckland or not. We don't know how many there are, but there are at least 2, and possibly more. The only thing to do is to go off in a quite unexpected direction." "But that can only mean going into the old forest," said Fredegar, horrified. "You can't be thinking of doing that. It is quite as dangerous as black riders." "Not quite," said Merry. "It sounds very desperate, but I believe Frodo is right. It is the only way of getting off without being followed at once. With luck, we might get a considerable start." "But you won't have any luck in the old forest," objected Fredegar. "No one ever has luck in there. You'll get lost. People don't go in there." "Oh, yes, they do," said Merry. "The Brandybucks go in, occasionally, when the fit takes them. We have a private entrance. Frodo went in once, long ago. I have been in several times, usually in daylight, of course, when the trees are sleepy and fairly quiet." "Well, do as you think best," said Fredegar. "I am more afraid of the old forest than of anything I know about. The stories about it are a nightmare. But my vote hardly counts, as I am not going on the journey. Still, I am very glad someone is stopping behind who can tell Gandalf what you have done, when he turns up, as I am sure he will before long." Fond as he was of Frodo, Fatty Bolger had no desire to leave the Shire, nor to see what lay outside it. His family came from the East Farthing, from Budgeford in Bridgefields, in fact, but he had never been over the Brandywine Bridge. His task, according to the original plans of the conspirators, was to stay behind and deal with inquisitive folk, and to keep up as long as possible the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still living at Crick Hollow. He had even brought some old clothes of Frodo's to help him in playing the part. They little thought how dangerous that part might prove. "Excellent," said Frodo when he understood the plan. "We could not have left any message behind for Gandalf otherwise. I don't know whether these riders can read or not, of course, but I should not have dared to risk a written message in case they got in and searched the house. But if Fatty is willing to hold the fort, and I can be sure of Gandalf knowing the way we have gone, that decides me. I am going into the Old Forest first thing tomorrow." "Well, that's that," said Pippin. "On the whole, I would rather have our job than Fatty's, waiting here till black riders come." "You wait until you are well inside the forest," said Fredegar. "You'll wish you were back here with me before this time tomorrow." "It's no good arguing about it any more," said Merry. "We still have got to tidy up and put the finishing touches to the packing before we get to bed. I shall call you all before the break of day."